Okay, good evening, dear students. So now we'll discuss a natural approach in foreign language teaching, learning. So let's start, outline again. I will talk about background of natural approach, objectives, principles, theoretical background, types of learning in this approach, methods, teacher-student relationship, techniques, and activities. Okay. So let me firstly talk about background of natural approach. In 19, this approach was established by Tracy Terrell, who was a teacher of Spanish, in 1977. So he was mostly like he designed mostly implementations and classroom procedures of this approach. However, Stephen Krashen, like Tracy Terrell, he kind of asked some suggestions and also asked the help from Stephen Krashen based on the theoretical basis, theoretical sections, So Stephen Krashen, he mostly developed the theoretical sections of natural approach, Then it was based on Krashen's influential theory of second language acquisition, okay? So this overall, this natural approach, it was developed by Krashen and Terrell generally in 1983. And then let's move on. So it employs naturalistic principles. This approach, it firstly appeared from the Terrell's own teaching experiences. He mentioned that this approach is useful in teaching learners starting from elementary to advanced level. So please do not confuse natural method, which is in fact the same as direct method. But the topic that we are covering today is natural approach, okay, not method. So now principles of natural approach. So here emphasis is on exposure, input rather than practice. So optimizing emotional preparedness for learning is really important here. Then prolonged period of attention to what the language learners hear before they try to produce language is again emphasized. Then willingness to use written and other materials as a source of comprehensible input. Now I will talk more about what is meant by comprehensible input. Okay. So theory of language here, communication is seen as a primary function of language. The natural approach, in fact, it came out from communicative approach primarily. Then premise of meaning, vocabulary is emphasized. Then language is seen as a vehicle for communicating meanings and messages. And Krashen and Terrell in 1986, they mentioned that acquisition can take place only when people understand messages in the target language. Okay. So here we have the idea of I plus one. I stands for input. Input plus one. For example, it means the input hypothesis states that in order for acquirers to progress to the next stage in the acquisition of the target language, they need to understand input language that includes a structure that is part of the next stage. You see, like you cannot teach grammar of upper intermediate level to pre-intermediate level students. You see, you can teach, for example, to intermediate level students, intermediate plus level, for example. Then lexical items, structures and messages, again, they have a high priority here. Then grammar has a low priority in this approach. Like it's not explained, but it can be mentioned sometimes only. Then, so a theory of learning is based on Krashen's language acquisition theory, where we have 5 different hypotheses, okay? So first one is acquisition learning hypothesis, where, for example, acquisition stands for natural way, which is natural way, paralleling first language development in children, unconscious process. So the naturalistic development here. Okay. For example, we can say that, like, do you remember yourself, or I don't know, your younger siblings, where they've learned their mother tongue, It's it comes in a natural way. You do not put a lot of effort there, Then learning, which is about which covers conscious rules about language, are developed. Forms of a language and the ability to verbalize this knowledge, formal teaching, correction of errors, they are emphasized. But learning cannot lead to acquisition, okay? Acquisition can maybe partially lead to learning, but learning cannot lead to acquisition, okay? Then second one is monitor hypothesis, where calling upon learned knowledge to correct ourselves when we communicate. Yeah, we might have we have the previous knowledge here, which kind of gives some signals if we've produced, I don't know, correct utterance, chunk or incorrect one, So 3 conditions limit the successful use of the monitor. First one, time. Time should be enough for a learner to choose and apply a learned rule. Then focus on form. Language user must be focused on correctness or on the form of output. Then knowledge of rules. A learner should know the rules, of course. So in order to be able to follow this monitor hypothesis, Third one, natural order hypothesis. So here, acquisition of grammatical structures proceeds in a predictable order. So, for example, of course, you cannot start directly from present perfect. You should, for example, start from verb to be. Then present simple, step by step. Then errors are signs of naturalistic developmental processes. Making errors are totally okay, again, in this approach, okay? Next one, input hypothesis, So hypothesis relates to acquisition and not to learning, again. Then people acquire language best by understanding input that is slightly beyond their current level of competence, which I've mentioned before, I+1, okay? Speaking fluently cannot be taught directly, rather it emerges independently in time after the acquirer builds up linguistic competence by understanding input. Then comprehensible input, context, Here not only I+1, context is also important here. Then the last one, affective filter hypothesis, where your motivation is important. If the student is highly motivated, it is really easy for the learner to explain the language, to learn the language, to be able to speak fluently in that language. Then self-confidence, if again learner is self-confident, it's again easy to learn language, foreign language. Then anxiety, so for example, if student has a high level of anxiety, of course it's difficult to cope with foreign language, so anxious acquirers have a high affective filter, you see. Then analysis of Krashen's hypothesis. Overall, these 5 hypotheses have obvious implications for language teaching. In some, these are as much comprehensible input as possible must be presented. Comprehensible means understandable, and whatever helps comprehension is important. Visual aids are useful, as is exposure to a wide range of vocabulary rather than study of syntactic structure. Then focus in the classroom should be on listening and reading. Speaking should be allowed to emerge, you see. Firstly, receptive skills, where your student learner receives information, listens, reads, then only speaking should be allowed to emerge. Then in order to lower the affective filter, student work should center on meaningful communication rather than on form. Input should be interesting and so contribute to a relaxed classroom atmosphere, okay? Objectives of natural approach, for beginners to become intermediate, then being able to get around in a target language, communicating with monolingual target language speaker, reading most ordinary texts in target languages with some use of dictionary, knowing enough target language to continue to improve on your own. So syllabus of natural approach, basic personal communication skills, for example, oral, listening to announcements in public places, for example. Then basic personal communication skills about reading and writing personal letters. Then academic learning skills, oral one, listening to lecture. Then written one, taking notes in class, you see. In fact, it's a bit related to current teaching methodologies, Then natural approach is designed to develop basic communication skills, both oral and written, which was mentioned by Krashen and Terrell in 1983. Let's move on. Then communication goals may be expressed in terms of situations, functions, and topics too, again. Then functions derive naturally from the topics and situations. It's not kind of planned beforehand, yeah, often. Then the purpose of a language course will vary according to the needs of the students and particular interests. Yeah, students can be engaged in this learning process. Then content selection should aim to create a low effective filter, which is a friendly, relaxed atmosphere, which comforts the students. Then types of learning and teaching activities. So here, for example, teacher talk, like in this approach, yeah, natural approach, there are not specific, we don't have specific activities and techniques. Most of them are adapted from previous methods, okay? So, for example, teacher talk focus on the objects in the classroom and on the content of the pictures as with the direct methods. Then, to minimize stress, learners are not required to say anything until they feel ready, but they are expected to respond to teacher commands and questions in other ways. It can be nonverbal, answer, yeah, as in suggest a PDF, for example, yeah. Then teacher provides comprehensible language and simple response opportunities, yeah, which will not stress students. Then they can answer to questions starting from yes, no, yeah, step by step to open-ended questions. Then charts, as you can see, pictures, advertisements, and other realia, focal point for questions. Then techniques borrowed from previous methods, again, comment-based activities from TPR, meme, gesture, and context as in direct methods, yeah, and group work activities in CLT. So what characterizes the natural approach is the use of familiar techniques which focus on providing comprehensible input. Okay, let's move on. So learner roles, yeah. So learner is seen as processor of comprehensible input, which has learners roles based on 3 different stages. So in pre-production stage, learner participates in the language activity without having to respond in the target language, for example. Pre-production stage, yeah. So participating in the language activity without having to respond in the target language, where learners just receive the information, yeah. Then early production stage, students respond to either or questions, use single words and short phrases, fill in charts, and use fixed conversational patterns, yeah. Then the last stage, speech emergent phase. Students involve themselves in role-playing games, contribute personal information and opinions, and participate in group problem solving. Then let's move on with learner roles. Also, learners have 4 kinds of responsibilities in the natural approach classroom. Again, providing information about their specific goals so that acquisition activities can focus on the topics and situations most relevant to their needs. Yeah, it's about needs analysis. Then taking an active role in ensuring comprehensible input. They should learn and use conversational management techniques to regulate input. Then the next one, deciding when to start producing speech and when to upgrade it. Then way learning exercise, for example, grammar study are to be a part of the program, deciding with the teacher the relative amount of time to be devoted to them, and perhaps even complete and correct them independently. Then teacher roles, yeah, teacher has 3 different roles. The first one, teacher is the primary source of comprehensible input in the target language. Then teacher creates an interesting, friendly, and low effective filter classroom atmosphere. Then the last one, teacher is responsible for collecting materials and designing their use. Then instructional materials, yeah, materials come from worlds of realia, relates classroom activities to real world and fosters real communication among learners. Then primary aim of materials is to promote comprehension and communication. Then pictures and other visual aids are essential, yeah, which is content for communication. Then games, they are useful classroom materials too. Then you can also analyze procedure by your own lessons start with TPR, total physical response comments, because students in the early stage, they just receive information. They can answer with some gestures, for example, yeah, or they can just do those commands, yeah, stand up, for example, turn around, then introducing classroom terms and props into commands, then, for example, use names of physical characteristics and clothing to identify members of the class by name. For example, what is your name? Yeah, then class, look at Barbara, for example, yeah. Using visuals, typically magazine pictures, to introduce new vocabulary, and continue with activities requiring only students' names as a response, and using several pictures, asking students to point the picture being described, and so on. Yeah, you can again analyze them at home.